Sorry, just was trying to set up my own recording. Okay, yeah, so Steve and I worked on the Better Connections grant, and we submitted that at the end of mid to end of February. So we should hear, I think, later this month whether or not we receive that grant. So
Oh, great.
that's my announcement.
Exciting.
So the Better Connections grant, I think, can we expound on it for people who don't know or watching?
I guess so, yeah. Can you give just like a one sentence about the purpose?
Sure. So it's basically a corridor study looking actually primarily from Exit 1 to Bridge Street, looking at creating safer intersections, improving pedestrian and bicycle facilities. It's kind of like the one kind of major roadway in Brattleboro that doesn't have a plan for bike lanes. And then there's a lot of intersections that we have problems with. It'll look at stormwater in that area and the potential for infill housing development. So it could actually look at the impact of what if Winston Crowdy campus is developed with infill housing, what will that mean? And so it's just a corridor study. And should position us well for some implementation grants for bike ped and intersection improvements there.
Right. Okay. Exciting for people along that corridor, but the whole town in general, in my opinion. Any update on the walk bike action plan?
Yes, thank you. So we have a draft of the walk bike action plan. It's going to be presented to the select board next Tuesday, March 14th. I will get you a copy of it in advance. The steering committee reviewed it. We've got some edits that are going on right now, so I should have those by Thursday.
Okay. Fantastic.
So that plan is wrapping up.
Right. And I've just kind of had this idea that with the ARPA money that, well, not that I'm the only one that's had this idea, but perhaps, the select board is going to be having kind of, involved and thoughtful series of meetings or parts of meetings to having community outreach and participation about how to use the remaining ARPA funds, something around almost a bit under $2 million for the town. And perhaps we could advocate for some of the projects in the plans that we've worked on in past years. So just something to keep in mind and keep aware of the select board's discussions and outreach for participation and comments in the next several months. Okay, Sarah, did you want to, Sarah kind of led something in the intervening month.
So I think many of you have heard of, or at least read some articles from Strong Towns, which is a nonprofit sort of advocacy group around strong towns. And they have every year, I think this year's the 8th year, it's called the Strongest Town Contest. And I submitted Brattleboro with a ton of help from Sue and Steve and Tom. And essentially it's like a bracket system, probably mimicking, March Madness. So we should find out by March 16th if we've made it into like the Sweet 16. But the sort of application included questions about like what are people in your town doing to decrease the negative impacts of parking on the community? What are people in your city doing to shift the focus towards maintaining existing infrastructure instead of building more roads? They talked about zoning and housing, talked about greater accounting and budget transparency, and building streets that are dominated by people and accommodate automobiles as opposed to the other way around. So submitted that and some photos, and hopefully, I don't know, we move on to Sweet 16.
I will add, first, thank you, Sarah, for taking that initiative and doing that and working on that, taking the lead, and staff as well. But also I'll say that I don't know to what extent it would have helped to have the commission like sign off on this, or if they don't expect that at all, but we had it kind of signed off by the planning department because it happened in the intervening period of planning commission meetings. And it's not something that requires a commission sign off. Maybe in further brackets, it will help if we do, but it didn't seem to meet the deadline, and it just seemed no need to get it on a commission meeting or warn one in the intervening month for this. So that's why you guys are just doing it.
I only gave people about 4 days. And the thing is I kept seeing these emails and I kept deleting them. And then like the last email, I was like, maybe we should submit. And then I was like, oh, it's in 4 days. So, definitely in future years, I think having sort of the full sign off, but they have a space in the application for like team members.
Oh.
And so I included myself, Tom, Sue, and Steve. So, all with our respective titles, if you will.
Right.
But yeah, I think also having input to answer those kind of questions. Although Sue and Steve, obviously gave really great information to answer those questions, but obviously any other input from commission members in future years would be appreciated.
Great. Any questions, comments about that or any other announcements?
Well, I don't know if this was a good time. I was mentioning before I didn't get a chance to email you guys due to my extensive work. I was mentioning in the regards that I mentioned to Sue, I guess I didn't bring it to your attention. I figured bring it to the commissioners too about VHIP. I don't know if you ever heard of that program.
No.
Okay.
Maybe if the home improvement program.
Yes. And at some point I'd like to bring it to, I guess I spoke with Sue, maybe we could put it on the agenda for next month. Maybe expound on it because I had gotten some information and bring it to yours and Sue's attention about that program and what it has to do, if it's applicable or applicable to what we're doing. And it's something in regards to housing. I'll have you guys look at that and then you can determine if that's something that you want to pursue.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll talk about that. I remember you shared the email and we responded. That was some weeks ago. I'll have to look back at that and see where we landed and what we can do with that. We'll talk after the meeting.
Absolutely.
Anything else before the minutes? Okay, moving on to considering the minutes of last meeting. Any questions, comments? On 221B for the staff recommended things, at the end of that says that the commission discussed adding, and then it's just blank.
Oh, that was supposed to be, it had to do with
The closer part of Elliott, the closer part of Flat, Harmony Square Park lot.
Yes. Closer to Elliott and Flat.
And then the one that seemed to have a little confusion about which was a 221F3 about the screening of at-grade parking. Is the plan just that when we see that in April for finalization, it will be the clarified version? Okay. If there's nothing else, I'll hear a motion. I would like to hear a motion to approve the minute.
I move that we approve the minutes of February 6th as amended.
Excellent. Is there a second?
Second that.
Harry seconds. Welcome, Prudence. If there's no more discussion, then let's raise our hands if we're in favor. That's all three in person, and that's all three remotely. Great. Okay, moving on to our 6:10 p.m. item, the bylaw modernization grant. We have Brandy Saxton here of PlaceSense, our consultant for this project, to go over some kind of final issues with this project, and hopefully we can resolve them all at this meeting.
Great, thank you guys. I have the rundown of section by section comments that you had from the last meeting, and I put together a memo that you should have in front of you from the end of last week, that responded to not every single one of them, but the ones that there was some sort of question about, and then there's a few of them that we need to go back in and discuss a little bit further. And then there were two issues that I think Friday when I wrote this memo, I punted on to give me a little bit more time to finish those out, to come back around. And so we can also talk about those other two items, which is the building height and the traditional neighborhood PUDs as well. I did write something up on that, but I know I only got it over to Sue sort of middle of the day today. So I don't know if you've got that in front of you.
They got it late in the day.
Yeah. So, hot off the presses, it is. But we'll talk through the issues, and then we can move forward from there. So my suggestion is that we sort of walk through the March 3 memo and stop at least at the ones where I am suggesting that we have some more conversation, but you may have some additional ones that you want to stop at and talk a little bit more. So any questions or comments along the way, if I'm sort of speeding through something, just stop me, and we can talk about that. So I'm going to skip over building height and then come back to that one when we talk about the later additions. I will point out, in response to your just changing the minutes, that I actually have a bad typo in number 2. The item about ground floor residential prohibition. I meant to say that I didn't see any technical reason for not adding those items instead of for adding them. But so that's entirely a policy decision for the group to make. There's, sort of the two competing objectives between encouraging housing and then supporting downtown economic vitality. You're finding the balance point that you think works best for your community. Technically, obviously, no problem going in either direction. That there to bring up to you. So I don't know if you want to spend more time talking about that one now, or.
I think it was agreed at the last meeting that we were going to kind of round it around Elliott Street, including
okay.
As well.
Okay.
So I think
I guess I didn't get that sense from the notes, but
that's my recollection too. But any commissioner here, speak up if you disagree. Okay.
Okay. So building separation, and I know, Sue, that you did get in touch with the fire department and get some of their perspective and their code input there. I know we've talked about that at several meetings. In my mind, the way to think about it is that either the building should be together, joined with a party wall, or you need to be able to get around the building to maintain it. I know that there's examples of buildings in Brattleboro that are closer than that to their adjoining neighbor, but it doesn't come without problems. And so the question is, what do you want to allow in the future going forward? So if you're just sort of thinking about the idea of what does it take to set up a ladder or set up scaffolding so that you can paint all sides of your building, for instance. The other thing I did put in the notes here is that we can go through and say 0 or 6 where we've done the 6 foot. There are other ways in the mechanisms in the code to get to attached buildings, but we could just emphasize that that's possible by saying 0 or 6.
Could you just, we don't have to open up the regs right now, but could you just speak to one example or briefly how the regs already cover that?
The attached building forms?
And as far as
so the attached housing is identified as a use type, and we've also, remember, in the missing middle housing also made provision for attached units. So I think And you have the provision for footprint lots too. So there's several ways in which you can get to
Okay.
different forms of attached housing. The district setback requirement isn't going to prevent the construction of an attached building. It would require, it would work at the outsides of the property line, and then the inner lines, if you were going to have separate parcels, you've got the administrative mechanisms to allow for that.
Right. Well, I think the vast majority of time, potential project developers, people just ask these questions of staff, right? And if staff understands these things, and if it already is in the regs, we don't necessarily, like you're saying, need to double up and, make things longer just to make it uber clear, but perhaps it could be helpful.
It won't change the page count whether or not you add the zero or.
Yeah. But so the current mechanisms would allow for that even on existing multiple lots?
Yeah, if somebody wanted to build an attached housing, structure, they could do that within a lot and then divide up the internal lots. I guess if you had two adjoining landowners come in and they wanted to do it across an existing lot line, you could do that as well. That's probably a less likely scenario than somebody coming with a piece of property that they want to put some form of attached housing on.
Sure.
And I just want to confirm that there wasn't anything in the conversation with the fire department, fire marshal, whoever it was you spoke with, that would conflict with a 6-foot minimum.
So basically, if you want to do nothing special, nothing, fire rating resistance, if you 20 foot, if you have a 20 foot between structures, there's no special firewall rating. There is if you are anywhere between, anything less than that. Okay. So it will add cost. We weren't able to kind of work through all the scenarios. Sure. But he did send me the table, and there are fire rating resistances that increase the closer that you are. So that is going to add cost. The one thing I had wondered about with the zero, what if one person builds to the lot line, so that means the other one has to attach. How do you deal with that kind of requirement on the next lot?
I think we had talked about it a bit, and we're thinking of maybe 6 or attached could possibly clear that up in some way, or if there's another more succinct way of doing that. I like what Tom was bringing up with the idea of reducing friction to people finding out that's an option versus reducing the size of this document. But I definitely agree with Brandy that the 3 or 4 spaces of text that are going to get put in is probably not a big.
And it would be in every district's dimensional standards, right? Okay.
I think it would be easier for folks to find that there.
I see.
It wouldn't be in every
into the 2 whatever.
Yeah, I'm not on board with every district. I mean, we're talking about the RN here. Are you saying you want it?
No, it would be in. Oh, right. Well, the MU and the RN and just a few of them, right?
I don't know. I guess that's going to be up to you.
Yeah, I think we can look back through. I can't remember off the top of my head the list where attached housing already is allowed, but I think it's mostly the developed districts. So I think it would make sense there. We can look at where the most sense makes to put the note, where it makes the most sense to put the note. It could be in the table of the dimensional standards, or we could flag it as sort of part of attached housing or something. So we can look at where it's best to sit that. But if you wanted to say something along the idea that, it's a 6-foot side setback unless, buildings are attached. So
I think as far as I understand it, if we do this also through the base zoning, it would allow for buildings of different uses to be attached to one another in a sort of urban pattern, not just attached housing, as I think is really more or less the only option that we would allow for in most non-downtown districts without PUD or some other kind of plan for that specifically on one lot. So I think that's an interesting flexibility that this would add just by doing it that way specifically.
Mhm. Sounds good to me personally. Let's hear from Dan.
So-
He's had his hand up a bit.
Yeah, this is a question for Brandy or to add to this. I appreciated the anecdote from the neighborhood walk, Brandy, about one property owner not being able to repair their roof, right?
Mhm.
Because of another property owner not allowing them to set up ladders next door. And I guess, well, maybe this is more of a question, actually, maybe for Sue. Is there a possibility that we need to build in some sort of mediation that the town could provide in those situations? I don't recall exactly where that property was, but sounds like a good test case to figure out, you know, if you are going to, have these minimal setbacks, then how can we help make, let's say a roof repair possible? I guess that's for either Brandy or Sue.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's asking to expand the programming that we do, and that would be a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation. I don't know that we have those skills. There's definitely mediators in the community, and sometimes mediation can be mandated by the environmental court, actually. So whether or not the town could take that on, I mean, I'm inclined to say no at this point, but I'm not even sure that would be a department head decision. Probably be expansion.
I think we could also consider treating this in a similar way that we do with shared parking and private rights of way and other kinds of easements, where that is required for typically in DRB cases, but we may well have administrative acts that also call for that. I can't recall off the top of my head, but if we were to require evidence that there had been a recorded deed that clarified what access easements there would be to the property. Historic preservation easements often clarify that sort of access to a property. So I'm sure it is a possibility. Whether or not it's statutorily allowable to have that in the language, I'm not exactly sure, but I would imagine it's feasible.
So, I mean, that kind of requirement, I think, would go forward fairly well, because you're likely talking about buildings that are going to end up in condominium ownership, and that would come through the formation and the regulations that go along with forming a condominium in the first instance. And those tend to fall outside the bounds of what municipalities regulate. Municipalities may require evidence that you've done that stuff, but the whole idea is that you have the legal structure in place to solve problems without having to involve the municipality. I do have to say that this location, I think, if I'm remembering correctly from their walk, was within sight distance of the municipal building, but I don't think you would want a system whereupon the town was put in the position of trying to mediate neighbor disputes. That's actually one of the things that we usually try to avoid creating too many of through zoning.
Yeah.
Okay, then wouldn't we be creating a situation where these disputes are more likely?
I think.
Wouldn't we want to prevent that?
I mean, I think that it is something to consider. I mean, there's the other common cause of neighbor disputes, which is snow sliding off one person's roof, ending up in the other person's driveway. Those are ongoing, types of issues that do happen as housing gets denser. In some ways, the attached piece maybe solves the roof problem, sliding snow off the roof problem. But, it is one of the things that the higher density of structures and closer proximity of structures does raise is the need for people to be able to live compatibly with their neighbors, which we all hope for, but we know doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I suppose it's worth saying we do also get quite a few very offbeat neighbor disputes in any zoning district in town over the darndest things that we would have never seen coming. So it's not something we can really avoid or be sure that we'll be able to avoid. But you know, at some point, I guess it's a balancing of values in the same way that many of these policy questions are, where there's probably some place that the commission can come to a consensus over whether you know, there is the balance of the values of you know, possibly marginally more infill or marginally more neighborhood disputes, how to weight those.
Well, personally for me, I, you know, after hearing multiple times and more, you know, more development of this, this kind of hard stop from Brandy on the 6 feet side and rear setbacks, I'm feeling more and more in agreement. But it still brings up for me the questions of should the waiver table be modified a bit, and should the accessory structures table for setbacks be modified a bit? Because in these districts where we're going to, it seems like we're going to allow primary structures to be within 6 or as close as 6 feet to the side and the rear. The dimensional waiver table gives no, I don't think, maybe it gives just 1 foot of potential benefit if they satisfy the waiver requirements and the DRB grants it. But perhaps there could be situations, not attached housing, but situations that the DRB could review. You know, if someone wants 3 feet and their roof, and you know, it's not the eave of the roof that's in that setback, but the rake, you know, and who knows? It just seems like the dimensional waiver table wouldn't really be relevant anymore to these developed districts. It wouldn't give any benefit. And maybe that's fine, but I like the idea of having some flexibility.
I mean, another way to view that is that you've given the waiver by right by lowering the dimensional standard to the point that you have, so that you know now don't have to go get special permission for what you could have gotten before.
Right. And so do you think with the accessory, some of the accessory structures being allowed a bit closer than the primary structure, but just being 5 feet from the side or rear, and then so in essence only 1 foot closer than the primary structure? Do you think in developed districts for things like a little shed or other accessory structures that it would make sense that those could be allowed closer? I mean, when those are just a story tall, the ladder issue doesn't come into play as much.
Not just storage, though. Some of the accessory structures might be like a little workshop.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember before I find what you actually just outright exempt in terms of size. So where does that sort of shed trigger? I can't remember without looking it up.
Exempted from permitting entirely?
Yeah.
At right now, we don't actually have that trigger, but that's something that the commission had asked for staff to bring in. So I think it might not have been actually fully acted on yet, but we had brought 64 square feet.
But that was supposed to meet setbacks though too.
Right.
The 5 foot setbacks.
And I think 10 feet tall, maybe 8 feet tall, 1 floor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's true. There isn't a small structure exemption in here. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that might be a way to think about that as well. You know, municipalities sometimes will have exemptions for very small accessory structures like the little tiny garden shed that basically just holds the mower. And then may have reduced setbacks for something slightly larger. And then once you get up to something, that's big enough to park a car in or that has 2 stories, you sort of treat it the same as you would a principal structure from a setback standpoint. So there's different ways of looking at that, but it is probably a good point to, once you guys do settle on where you are with these dimensional numbers, to go back through those other pieces and make sure that they fit compatibly together.
Yeah, Brandy, what do you think about in that, figure 3/1-1, the accessory uses and structures that I was bringing up, using in some ways, in some cases, at least more of a percentage or fraction based technique, system for having reduced setbacks than just a number? Because if it's, if a shed can be within 5 feet in the rural district, that's pretty darn close in the rural district. But if it can be within 5 feet in the mixed use district, that doesn't, I don't know, that would seem much more in it seems like, to me, the accessory structure should get some of the same density benefit in the denser districts that the primary structures get.
Well, I
Treated the same
yeah,
across all districts.
they are at this point the same across all the districts. I think the question of doing it as a percentage could work for a couple of them, but I think that there's some that the percentage number wouldn't necessarily work very well for. I think you probably want to decide some of these things are a straight up question, and then some of them, the sheds may be sort of the thing that's more of a building. Perhaps that is something you could relate to the zoning district setback for principal structures, but I think a lot of these, because they're not really the same sort of thing, sidewalk, driveway, those types of things have a different different set of criteria that are going along with them, I think, and are need to have a different approach.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm refamiliarizing myself with figure 3-1 here. So you've got garages and carports, which are more structural. The pools, hot tubs, decks, patios one, that also speaks to sort of active use areas where there's going to be people potentially congregating on the properties. So, how much sort of separation and privacy there. And you've got the sheds one, yeah.
Right, is like the heating and cooling units. If someone builds in these developed districts to 6 feet to the side and rear, then they can't just put one single mini split condenser outside that wall anymore, because they stick out more than a foot.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's one example of why I'm bringing up that doesn't seem to fit.
Well, I think some of them, will probably need to be tweaked.
Okay. And we can do that.
I mean, we've had complaints about mini splits and the noise from them. So,
yeah, no, true.
I mean, that's the thing, reducing the setback, like there actually is impact,
right.
If they're under somebody else's window. So
a few feet's not going to do much though.
Ultimately, that noise was under the threshold for the current noise regs. However, those don't apply to residential use, so we wouldn't have been able to really do anything about that under current regs. So staff might have to go back in and think about that one.
Yeah. Well, so just something to think of for you, Brandy, but certainly something we can, if we want to, we can work on afterwards. But Dan, if you wanted to comment, I saw your hand up, but you took it away.
Yeah, I think you made a good point about the mini split compressors, and the other piece is so of course we're all, besides ladder access, we're talking about drainage situations, right? So the compressors have drainage requirements also, but you know, the as planned drawing that someone gets with a certain setback may not be what actually gets built, and people can tend to push the limit. So you might assume that someone's going to do that. That's my, you know, that's my other apprehension about it. It's not that, you know, okay, if everyone follows that limit, it might be fine. But even with our current limits, people tend to make mistakes sometimes or alter the plan. It's one point to consider.
Well, Gary.
I guess one last question, burning of the ages. You mentioned air units. What about lighting? As far as that is concerned, you know, that it's so close.
The structure
Yeah.
of lighting,
Yeah,
like lights that stick out
Yep.
from the structure.
I was just looking at that, seeing how that,
Yeah, lighting is supposed to be shielded and downcast, so, you know, we had complaints about lighting.
right, that's another
With
issue I was thinking of too.
I
But
guess
I mean, it's all things to think about when you're
Right.
trying to set the setback.
Yeah, I was just digesting, think for lighting for that too, okay.
I'm just curious to check in here. So the proposal at the moment is a setback of a minimum of 6 feet
Correct.
or attached, 0. Is there anything anyone else would rather see? Otherwise,
Good
I wonder
question.
if we can move along.
Yeah. I think we can. Yep, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I think 8 feet would, I mean, we don't need to start to get into, I guess we should get into it. We don't have to get into inches, but you know, round numbers, you know, 8 feet actually makes a bit of a difference because a vehicle can get through there. You know, there's a little bit more. At 6 does seem a bit, you know, I understand the reason for it, but if you do, and again, as I was saying, if you say 6, someone's going to push it to 5 or 4. So if you say 8, someone's going to push it to 6 anyway, maybe, you know, possible anyway.
Thoughts on that modification?
You okay with these as well?
I personally want to think it should be pushed as small as the consultant is willing. Because, you know, at least maybe I'm biased, but I live in, you know, a historic neighborhood where there's a slew of examples of structures that are really close to each other. And maybe because it's not the most fastidiously, you know, maintaining our properties neighborhood, it doesn't seem like the neighbors have much conflict or issue in the 3 or 4 years I've been there. With ladders and access, and people are pretty friendly, but that's my neighborhood. But also I'll say that the town plan values the historic character and development pattern of well-established mature neighborhoods close to downtown. And we have historic resource overlays, but all they focus on is the architecture, not the actual like layout and density and closeness of the actual neighborhood, the development pattern. So I personally want it as small as our worker bees are willing to allow, which I hear being 6 feet. So that's my.
I think the decision is the planning commission's, and
Yeah.
I mean, this is a recommendation from the consultant.
Yeah, and I totally hear that, but I value the professionals' opinions who've been doing this work for decades.
As a quick point of clarification, just in regards to 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, what have you, keeping in mind that other than in the situation where a dimensional waiver is applied for and granted, you'd be having 12 feet between homes unless they were attached with the 6 feet.
Right.
And you'd be having 16 feet. Yeah, between homes unless they were attached with 8 feet. So it's not just 6 feet between homes, even though we might start thinking about 6 feet and picture that incredibly narrow gap. And then also we do have zoning enforcement that does catch when surely not 100% of the times that something has not been built exactly as it was proposed, whether on purpose or entirely without meaning to. But it does, almost always tend to come around and reach a resolution. So I'd encourage folks not to be too worried about that being done without any kind of recourse.
Would it be possible for one neighbor to build to 0 and the other to build to 6? Or is it if somebody builds to 0, the other one has to build to 0?
You would need to have a proposal for the buildings to be built together at one point, or so either there's going to be, it's not a preemptive, I'm going to build to the lot line and then subsequently someone else is going to come along and build to the lot line.
Okay. So to that point, then Steve's point about them being at least 12 feet apart, if 6 feet is the minimum, that would be a wide enough distance for a car to travel if it needed to, people to set up ladders, scaffolding, etc.
Well, that assumes that people don't build a fence down the middle. So in terms of the vehicle access,
Sure.
so or plant a hedge or something like that. I think the reason I said 6 feet is I sort of see that as sort of your minimum with the idea of getting around it with some basic ability to access for something like painting or, washing the upper floor windows or something like that, right? That you need to do from the outside. I think if you go much below that, you're going to really constrain that ability to take that kind of maintenance and do it entirely within your own property. Now, if your neighbor and you are on good terms and you have the ability to access from further over to do that maintenance work, that's great. But you want to make sure that it is possible. And I think the fire department, also has concerns about making sure they can get around a structure as well, which is sort of what some of that fire safety stuff comes back to as well. So, I think we've had a good discussion of the issues. I don't know how much new construction you're really going to see at that tight. I wouldn't expect it to be, a huge change in the built form of most of the neighborhoods. Some of the non-conforming properties will be conforming under this, but I don't know if there's going to be, a massive upsurge in people deciding to build that close together in existing neighborhoods. I would kind of be surprised if there was.
Mm-hmm.
Do we need a
Yeah, I'm hoping
on
to
this?
wrap this one
I
up.
can send it.
Okay. Should we vote? So it's the several developed districts, the ones we're talking about in this project, changing the side and rear setbacks. This is in the RN, the MU, the BC.
It's in the RN 3600,
RN
not the
3600.
RN 5400.
Okay.
That one is a 10-foot setback.
Okay.
Mhm.
Changing it to, currently they're like 10 feet and 20 feet, something like that. So this is changing it to 6 feet.
So
I guess I just made the motion, but Steve?
12 and a half, or they add up to
20.
25, no less than 10. So it's functionally a little more than 10.
Right.
So this would be essentially cutting that in slightly more than half in the RN 3600, just
Yeah,
for
I think so.
context.
Okay. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, if I just may add another wrinkle for consideration, essentially a lot of property lines have sloped land, connecting to two different properties. And that's where I think to reiterate, drainage issues where you have much closer roof slopes into a dirt slope that can cause problems for the neighbor. And we have seen some cases of that. I just, I know it won't make a huge difference 2 feet, but given that it is what it is already and folks there have been some issues, I just think it's worth considering as part of this to think that, it's probably, one way or the other, even if it's 6 feet, it's probably not going to create a whole new housing unit, for example, or, it's not going to make a huge difference. I think, as Brandy said, we're probably not going to see much of this kind of encroachment, toward a property line. But when you do, you want to, I think it's better to be a little bit cautious myself. That's it.
Someone want to, I kind of made a motion, but in light of Dan's comment, does someone want to make an actual real motion? Doesn't have to be said perfectly.
So Tom, we would be voting on the 6-foot standard. Is that what you're asking for a motion on?
Sure, I guess, yeah, let's do that. But we're with that, okay, I guess I'll just say it. For those developed districts in question, that the side and rear setbacks be changed to the wording along the lines of as close as 6 feet to the property line, or 0 if attached housing. Wait, should that word housing be there, or just attached structure? Oh, no. If attached. Obviously, the property owners have to come to agreements in that way if they're building a wall together. Is there a second for that?
I'll second that.
Hopefully it's clear, but if not, feel free to discuss. But not hearing anything, all those in favor, please raise your hand and keep it up. That's the 3 here in person, and Sarah and Prudence remotely. And not in favor, raise your hand. Dan, okay. And we heard you, good points. And that's the 6 of us, great. Moving on to lot size, probably.
So somewhat similar set of issues to some extent. You've talked about going smaller. I still am expressing the concern that pushing that number down further increases the likelihood of people in the neighborhoods that are going to be affected by this being concerned about that possibility, on one hand, as a perception issue. And then on the other hand, I also question, which is sort of an opposite viewpoint to the perception issue, whether this would really achieve the generation of housing that you're looking for. Because it doesn't seem to me that a new house on a new lot is really the likely form of infill housing that you're going to see. I think, just in terms of understanding the kind of layout that's already there, the land that's already, the land that exists in these developed zoning districts, the creation of new lots is not going to be a major component of creating new housing. It almost doesn't matter where you, I think, put the number. It's still going to remain that way just because of how the lots are already configured.
Okay, people's thoughts? 3600. Yep, Sarah.
I have a thought. So I live in the Oak Grove neighborhood, and I'm purely just speaking for this neighborhood. I'm sure it's probably different in others, but we have a lot of lots that are essentially double lots. So there is actually a fair amount of empty lots, if you will. I don't know the sizes off the top of my head, but I guess that's when I think I was one of the people that was asking about why 3,600 and not smaller. Yeah, that's just something that came to mind, is that I can think of 3 just on my street for potential. That's not to say someone would actually, subdivide and build on it, but there is some empty land in this neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm another voice that I thinks, would like to see less than 3,600. I wonder, I guess maybe to brainstorm a little bit and maybe propose like a compromise in a sense. What if we added in the dimensional waiver table, reducing the lot size to whatever, as long as it goes before the DRB and participants, the public's eyes. I mean, there's a parcel on Pearl
That's
Street.
problematic, Tom.
Oh, is it? To add lot
Yeah.
size to the waiver
Yeah,
table?
that's not, that poses some statutory problems to waive lot size down. You basically can't do waivers to create, non-conforming lots like that. So it's just sort of the authority of the waiver doesn't cover that.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
I mean, are you identifying maybe one of the only potential negatives or harms is that people that already live in neighborhoods might get like scared by it? Because I feel like, if we make it smaller than 3,600, if the worst that happens is that no one uses that size, then like.
No, the worst that happens is you're not going to get this adopted. That's the problem, the perception issue that I was raising. So, not that, people may or may not take advantage of it if it's adopted, but the question is it something, you haven't had public engagement yet, really around these. There hasn't really been a lot of public, here sitting at these meetings either. So we don't really know how community members are going to feel when this does go through the adoption process. And so that's just, I don't have any evidence either, just necessarily, except for experience with other communities. And this one to me, I think 3,600 is pretty small in the Vermont context. Most Vermonters will think that that's a really small lot at 3,600. So going further down from when you're actually thinking about those existing residential neighborhoods, and I did just look at Oak Grove. I think the lots that you're referring to are plenty large, that they really are doubles. So they were doubles of lots, that are, they actually could subdivide in some instances, but yeah.
Just to follow up, Prudence. Now I just lost my train of thought. Did we ever look at what sort of the average lot size was in sort of the historically developed areas? I can't remember if we looked at what that size was.
We did do that analysis early on, and I also can't remember what the numbers are off the top of my head. It is something I can pull back out and send back around to you. My sense of the memory on this, and I don't know, Sue, if you remember from when we looked at this, was that getting down to that 3,600 level was going to really significantly reduce the number of undersized lots you had.
It was, and I'm wondering if I can pull any of the analysis up now.
And I'll add on that I did a slightly different query of lot size just in the RN, though I'm certain that the MU would look similar, if not more non-conforming. But while it might not be more than 10 or so percent, if not even 5%, in the RN at the moment, there's at least a few dozen lots that are under 3,600 square feet. So I think that's worth considering. There was even a lot of 1,400 or 1,500 square feet that was built on with a house. That was the smallest I found that wasn't a pump house or any other kind of easement. So that was kind of an interesting one.
Yeah.
Folks who are interested, oh, sorry, got Prudence had a hand up.
Well, hold on a second. Sue, have you found that, or should we let Prudence?
No,
go?
you should let Prudence.
Prudence, go ahead.
Thanks. I guess I want to speak for the 3,600, I think it's a pretty, it's a fairly significant reduction because we're at 6,200 now. And I also think just because we have some historic precedent for buildings being built, on smaller lots before there was zoning, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good thing to keep replicating. So I wouldn't want to see it go any smaller than 3,600.
Okay. Luna, did you have something?
I was just going to ask those who are interested in it being potentially smaller, is there a number that you'd throw out as a recommendation?
I think I would be interested in the analysis that we did early on of like what that sort of either average lot size or like most my brain's not working, the most common lot size in those historically sort of dense downtown neighborhoods, because then that would be something we could lean on in public comment. We're not making up a size, it's like it's everywhere in town actually.
So I had pulled up the map for Oak Grove so I could get some sense of your reference. And looking at that, some of the smallest lots on that street, just as a point of reference, are running right around the 6,000 square foot mark. So this, they were close to where the minimum was previously set or set in your current rules. And then those doubles that you were thinking about, they are doubles. They're like some of them are half an acre, which would put them close. There's one that was half an acre that would put it close to 20,000, a little bit more square feet. There was one that was like 0.4 acres. So that's going to be in the upper teens, 1,000 square feet. So that gives you some sense of those. I think the neighborhood that Tom lives in, for instance, has probably got some of the smallest lots in there. But, I think Stephen did raise the point, you can find maybe a couple dozen lots that would be smaller than that, but you're talking that it's out of hundreds of lots. So it is a very small percentage.
I think it might be helpful for conceptualizing what might be in the realm of below 3,600 that some commissioners may be interested in considering, but still actually able to happen within the other standards that have been set. We have the 6, 6, 6, and 10. So ultimately it'd be a 12 by 16 box would be a lot where you couldn't build on any part of it. That would be an only setback envelope, so to speak. So, waiver standards would allow, I suppose, for slightly smaller than that, but you could have a lot of that size or allow for a lot of that size and still have setbacks that make it otherwise impossible to build on that in a conventional way. So building out the setback envelope from the smallest kind of structure that you would think is appropriate might be a more productive way to think about the size of the lot instead of just the number of square feet. So if there was like a 20 by 40, 800 square foot house plus the setback envelope, or a 30 by 30 house plus the setback envelope, something like that, that might be a more tangible way of thinking about that.
I would certainly
Found the mapping.
Oh, I was certainly be entertaining to see what that would look like, what you mentioned, Tom, and what Sarah, just to get a conceptual idea how it would look in a draft, what that would look like, something, even though you did mention you have to be 36, but just to get an idea if something like that can be, there's a scope of a direction that can be done up in that area too, and in other areas in Brad. So I don't know if that's something that could be a side by side comparison to see what it would look like. I know Randy mentioned that that's something that a lot of people don't or not probably won't be in the cards at any time, just to get a visualization.
Well, you've
And
seen,
the one thing that I would add to what Stephen had just said, so if you're thinking about the building size, the setbacks, you also need to think about getting a car off the street on that lot as well in these neighborhoods. So you haven't completely eliminated that as a design component as well.
so Brandy, though, beyond the waiver aspect that I brought up, you're saying by Vermont statute, there's no way to have some sort of review process to allow for smaller lots than what the zoning says. There's no. Okay. It has to be-
You can do PUD type developments and get smaller components, but under conventional rules, you have to set a lot size, and there's no way to reduce that on a case by case basis.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up again to be clear.
Yep.
So I think Dan had his hand up, but I can't see the participants anymore.
I'll just add to what was being said. Similarly, along those lines, I was thinking you could visualize what the minimum frontage you would want in order to think of, what the smallest would be. So, for example, 30 feet frontage on the street, would give you 150 depth, 150 feet in depth, and at 3,600. And I think conceptually that's we could play with those numbers, but you then, as Steve was saying, you want to think about what size building can fit in that footprint, and it starts to get pretty not unbuildable, but maybe a diminishing returns kind of conversation where so in order to dig a foundation, for example, you need a little bit of space around you in the first place. There are going to be utility issues, of course. So anyway, I think you do want to think about something. I'm not really sure where I'm falling on the actual number, but somewhere in between the 36 and the 6,200, because it starts to get pretty tough to build anything. I think below, probably below 4,000, really.
Could somebody remind me what our minimum frontage is in these neighborhoods? And while we're taking a look at that, I was just looking back at Portland, Oregon, which is where I most recently lived. They have a zone with 1,500 square feet, another with 3,000, another with 4,200, another with 6,000. So it's, we are not Portland, Oregon by any means, nor am I suggesting that we be, but there are other places that find it buildable in tighter neighborhoods to have smaller lots. And for them, there are 3 levels below the 6,000 that we have had.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say about Portland is that they do let people park on the street, which is part of the chat. I mean, I hate to be the person who keeps mentioning it, but that is part of our calculation.
There's also a transportation system there that's fairly
Yeah,
robust.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I think we have to, in order to stay in compliance with our town plan, which is the foundational document for the land use regulations. I mean, our town plan doesn't envision that type of change to the residential neighborhoods currently. We can get there.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that it is possible to build houses on small lots.
Yeah. The proposed frontage is 36 feet minimum.
I think on the specific topic that Lennon was bringing up, there are a couple mid-Atlantic cities, which I know no one wants to have their Vermont, New Jersey, or whatever the phrase is, but the Camdens and, well, bad example perhaps, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Frederick, Maryland, Atlantic City, what have you. There are a lot of places that have exceedingly small lot sizes, and there's a strong correlation with those very small lot sizes. Plenty of confounding variables, of course. There's a strong correlation between that and very much more affordable housing without subsidy or with subsidy. And I think, it's a very real ethical question to consider. If you're going to put a hard limit on the quantity of land that someone can buy and say it's inconceivable to allow someone to choose to purchase any less than this. I mean, still in New Jersey, the Mount Laurel case, which of course doesn't apply to Vermont, as it was a state of New Jersey case, but it's still a frequent topic of discussion in planning history. Really talked about the tie-in between economic and racial segregation and lot sizes, which were far, far larger than what we're talking about here, but it's still a significant tie-in that is relevant and is worth considering in the state that has the largest average lot sizes by a pretty significant margin.
One idea that just occurred to me is if our minimum has been 6,200 square feet, I wonder if it would make sense to make the new 3,100 square feet. It's not a whole lot smaller, but it would allow lots that were previously allowed at 62 to be subdivided.
So it was actually 6,000 before.
Oh,
It
okay.
wasn't 62. It was 6. And it was the same idea, is that it was a proportion of frontage to depth. So it was 60 feet frontage, 100 feet deep. So how we came to 3,600 was basically, like Dan was suggesting, it was from the frontage number. So it's thinking about how much width you need to have access into the property from the street,
Sure.
and have the building with the side setbacks.
Thank you.
If I may, I just had to open up a acreage to square footage converter calculator, and
Can't do that
just-
math in your head, huh?
I cannot. No, thank you. But it is interesting just to give some acreage, kind of, if you do think in acres a little bit. So a tenth of an acre apparently is 4,356 square feet. That's 0.1 of an acre, right? 10% of an acre. I think I'm probably, because we do get our property, measured in acres, it might be convenient to, to think in terms of that. But I understand, it's easy to think dimensionally in feet as well.
Mhm.
So you could convert, like with the, let's say 4,300 ish, what that would look like from the street. But I think I'm closer to that. Because I like acres.
I can say that nobody in my neighborhood talks about their acreage.
No, I understand. But
Nonconformities.
Yeah.
but I believe they would know their acreage. They should, because they're I believe, that's what they would have on their deed and so forth, So in any case, if it's, a tenth of an acre or whatever it is, you're getting it in down to the hundredths place. I believe most people should get like 0.12, 0.08, whatever it is. Or it wouldn't be 0.08, but you know what I mean? It would be a decimal.
Yep.
Well, 3,600 is 0.08. So
There you go. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think we should try to wrap this up. I don't know if we're all of like mind, but so be it. Does someone want to make a motion? Well, Brandy, can you just quickly say which districts this 3,600 reduction applies to?
So it's the new residential district, and then we aligned the village center
In West Brattleboro.
mixed use district. I'm trying to remember. It may even have taken a realignment of the service center district. So basically anything that had been previously at the 6,000. So
Neighborhood center or no?
the neighborhood, I can't, let me pull up the table so I'm looking at it myself. So neighborhood, yes, neighborhood center.
Yeah, neighborhood center.
Mixed use
Mixed use.
neighborhood.
Okay.
Yep.
Which zones are there?
RN 36.
They're most of our developed districts, except for the service center and the urban center.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's not the service center, but it was the village center.
Was the village center?
Yep.
Okay. Someone want to make a motion for moving forward on the,
How would you word it?
all right, I'll make it. That for those 4 developed districts, we reduce the minimum lot size to 3,600.
I second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Gary, Lynna, Prudence, and Sarah. All those opposed? Dan and Tom. Does anyone want to revote? Does anyone want to ask the dissenters why they dissented? No. I bring
Yes.
this because I was one of the dissenters, but but also as an exercise in Robert's rules, as I understand them, we can always revote things.
Yeah.
You know, when something's voted, that's not necessary. And I don't necessarily want things to go slower than they do, but that's why sometimes like a straw poll is useful, because you see where people lay and you're like, oh, why do you feel that way? Maybe it will convince me. But so with that knowledge, are we sticking on lot size or moving on to the next one? Anyone?
So just to make sure I'm understanding here, is
Yep.
it true, Dan, that you were not in favor of this proposal because you'd like to see that number be larger?
Yes.
And I wanted smaller.
I know Tom is on the opposite end there. And, you know, I think it's kind of, it might beg the question why they went with 6,000. And maybe we, you go into that too much, but, you know, there are a lot of reasons, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the path forward here in terms of being able to make a decision?
The consensus, I guess.
Well, in April, we're going to, you mean for all this stuff? In
Well,
April?
this at least, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, in April, we're going to look, hopefully we're not going to get through everything that is on this agenda, today. So,
You're revisiting.
but the plan was to get through everything on this agenda and then look at all of the changes, both that Brandy's produced and that staff and, the accessory exemption and whatnot in April, and feel good, hopefully, at the end of that meeting with the changes. And then staff is going to warn 1 or 2 public hearings subsequently to that.
So, I mean, there is time in public hearings to have these discussions too,
Right.
Get a sense and make a recommendation to move it up or down based on the public hearings before you pass it along to the select,
Right.
before the planning commission passes it along to the select.
Right. Sarah?
Well, I'll just comment. Well, one, it's good to know that, even though it's say we vote and agree that it's 3,600, that there could be pushback
Yeah.
from public comment, and that can be changed. I think for me, I was, obviously pushing for smaller, but I think just hearing sort of more details on why that number and what that looks like with the building on it, and just the fact that it is, not necessarily half the size of what the current number, but it's still a significant reduction. And I think, maybe starting there, and who knows, maybe we'll get feedback from the public that it should be smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just, kind of see what happens there. So I'm just sort of explaining why I voted for that number.
Yeah, I do think the setback, the changes to this and the setbacks are a vast improvement over what we currently have. I don't know who came, why we have what we currently have, because, a lot of the lots in my neighborhood couldn't even be developed with the setbacks. And, I think they have downsides, but they shouldn't just be wholesale, not allowed. But yeah, Steve.
I was going to offer to the commission if there's interest in having staff model what different size rectangles that are structures would actually result in,
Right.
With different assumptions like having a driveway, not having a driveway, depth of lot, frontage of lot. I can.
Well, Gary seemed like he wanted to see that.
I wanted to basically see that.
And that could be good for the public hearing presentation. And also, if you could work in some current examples, like the one on Pearl Street or in my neighborhood, the historic ones.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Great. So it's not just an abstract number. Well, numbers aren't abstract, but are they? Anyway. Arbitrary? Yeah. Okay. Whew. Moving through this. Randy, can you?
Okay, so I also am recognizing that I know you had other agenda items too, and that we are past the time that you said you were going to be
Oh, right.
spending on this portion of the agenda. So, but there are a couple of points in here I'd really like to hit.
I think we should stick with you in the bylaw modernization grant.
Okay. So let's jump forward to item 6, which is an actual one where I need some more information from you guys about what it is that you are envisioning or want to allow for. So this is with regards to allowing off a property in the residential neighborhood to be developed with parking that would serve other lots in the neighborhood. We talked about it before. I was thinking that you were envisioning sort of the, attached carport garagey type structures that are typically, just they usually have open fronts and are closed in on 3 sides and a fairly basic parking structure, more garage-like than a residential garage sort of approach. So if you were envisioning sort of a parking lot with a deck above it, which is what I got out of the notes from the last meeting, then that's a different picture and would need different standards. So tell me what you were thinking.
Was this possibly something that I mentioned?
No, I don't think so.
Shared
It
parking
was,
a lot.
No, I think,
Okay.
let me pull it up.
Was this in reference to the question I sent in about 2-story parking garage?
Yes, it was.
yes, it was.
Okay,
What's the reason to not go 2 stories in height for parking garages?
so my thinking there was that if a parking garage could be 2 stories, it would be more effective in terms of being able to park twice as many cars without having that kind of tower effect, which would potentially make it easier to pencil. On the flip side, needing to move cars around is kind of like the issue of adding a staircase to a house, which takes up so much space on the first floor and the second floor that it starts to, not necessarily always make sense to do in comparison to just making the house a little bigger on 1 story. So just curious in terms of garaging, what other people were envisioning there. Was everybody imagining like a row of garage bays, or was anybody else thinking of a parking structure?
I like that, the bays, that's not a bad idea. I mean, it's getting a thought.
And this was just for the mixed use district?
No, this was in the residential, this would be in the residential neighborhood area as well. So it would allow basically for a lot to be the off-site parking for nearby parcels.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like the ideas of the bays, was my thought. I mean, considering what we talked about, I talked about with Steve too, having these off-site parking, which, will create more housing, and that way people can park off-site rather than just right on the property and taking up more space for parking lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the scale that you're likely to be looking at, to get a deck is probably not really feasible unless you happen to have a strange piece of property that you could actually drive into 2 levels of it on and deck it that way. But the scale, I think the issue you raised was sort of being able to, it's like adding a staircase except bigger, because you have to be able to have the turning radius to get your car up and down it. So that's quite a different scale and different type of structure.
Okay. So I guess the way I could imagine it then would be if there was covered parking off-site, I can imagine 2 ways it would happen. One would be that there would be kind of a garage with distinct bays, and the other would be that there would be a structure that cars would turn into and then turn one direction or the other to park in it. Is there any reason to not just keep it flexible that either of those could happen?
Yeah, there's no, the only limitation I think that's there is that it's a 1-story structure. So
Right.
I think that's the question that you.
Yeah, I'm sold on the one-story structure. So if I was the hang up, let's move along.
I think there is no, it wouldn't have to be, we didn't have to specify, so we'll
Okay.
keep it at 1 story.
Great.
Maybe it's still could
Okay.
be no roof. That's 1 story.
No.
The next one, just a quick confirmation from the group, from the language that relates to the West Brattleboro Neighborhood Center,
Mhm.
which is language that got pulled over from the rural business district. I couldn't tell from the note whether you were discussing whether you still wanted that language or you were just
I think this was Tom's comment.
I believe it was a comment from Tom. Yes.
Yeah, I think all that we spoke about it in meetings was that I think I just asked, or I think I just said something like, if we're converting the RB to the NC, should we incorporate some of the building, aesthetics issues to make it, to make a restaurant look like a barn with a cupola on it? But I wasn't necessarily advocating for it. So maybe I was unclear.
So
So-
if you want to go.
And I forget if anyone
Go
else
ahead.
with any thoughts on that. But it could be helpful to have the actual wording in your draft.
The NC does have form-based design requirements too. They just might be not as directly related to the West Brattleboro. plan.
Yes, so for me, it was just kind of to honor the work that had been done from a previous West Brattleboro master plan, where
That's right.
it really was about visual character,
Mhm.
that they were mostly concerned about kind of keeping that, I guess more Vermont vernacular.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I forgot
and
about that.
not wanting
yeah.
to see, architecture and that kind of stuff.
You
So
can go ahead and put it in there.
it really was just to kind of respect that work, and we really hadn't done any outreach on that
Yeah.
to see if that's changed at all,
Mhm.
which we should do in the next town plan.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the West Brattleboro, you brought that up before, Sue, but the West Brattleboro plan, it was before my time, so I tend to forget it. But yeah, I think it's important to honor past plans, especially if they were well received or done well. And so Brandy, when you incorporated that, you
Yep.
looked at the rest of the building standards that were already like innate to the neighborhood center and found that they
Yes.
held well. Okay, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
'cause-
So yeah, I just brought over the piece that Sue referenced, where it really is trying to have an architectural character that's maintains that Vermont vernacular and thinks about the materials a little bit and the form of the buildings.
Okay, nothing else from me. And if there's nothing from anyone else, can move on.
Okay. So I'm sad to say we're up to number 10, which is another numbers question.
Hmm.
But I think it may be, well, actually, no, it isn't the last one. The question around putting in a minimum unit size. So, once again, it's a policy question. I know you talked around the tiny house provisions, which do go up to 400 square feet in code. That's actually not particularly the relevant piece, the tiny house provisions. Really the more relevant piece would be to sort of think about it as in terms of an efficiency apartment, and what you need to have to make that happen from a code perspective. There isn't a hard number. We didn't get into this with the stuff that Sue got from the fire chief about code before, but very often code is not as easy as a one line number that you can just read off and be like, here's the answer. It's a whole bunch of if then and then that and go over here kind of relationships.
Mhm.
So I think the general sense is that getting a unit size below 300 square feet under most typical variations on building code in the United States isn't going to work. There's a minimum main room size, there's a requirement for a closet, there's a requirement for a kitchen countertop and some access around it, and then there's a requirement for a bathroom with a shower, a toilet, a sink, and a door, you know, an enclosed room with a door. So when you take these things into consideration and think about how they would get put together, effectively, it seems really unlikely you'd get below 300 square feet. So if you're going to choose a number and you want to reduce that number down, I would say that's your floor, practically speaking. You can, you know, set that where you feel it's appropriate, where you want to. The idea was to try to use that number for as much of anything is to help guide applicants so that they have a better sense of what might be possible on their property or within a building that they're considering adding infill housing to. You know, we haven't, you know, if you're thinking about breaking up the building and putting in units, you know, you're also going to have the need to get access to those units. So you're going to lose some floor area with, you know, hallways and stairwells and things like that as well. So it's really just sort of, in a way, that calculation of sort of what scale am I even looking at as a applicant.
I was one of the people who brought this forward, so in light of what you've just shared, Brandy, I would recommend that we move forward with 300, since that seems to be the minimum size that's working in other places.
I'll second that. Any other thoughts before, I guess, making a vote, which we all know is not our final decision, but we're kind of creating some actual direction and semi-action here.
But I'm loving the feedback.
Okay.
Great feedback.
Yeah, but on the reducing it to, because currently it's for the missing middle housing overlay, minimum unit size 430 square feet plus 100 square feet per bedroom, and just changing it to 300 plus.
And then the increment.
And then the increments. Okay. So so something just for one person, one bed would be 300 period, or 300 plus 100.
It depends on whether it's an efficiency or a one bedroom.
I see. Yep. Okay. So efficiency would be 300. Got it. If people understand the motion, then let's vote.
Can you repeat the motion one more time so that there's clarification?
Sure. I'll let the motion maker repeat it.
Motion maker.
I propose that we move forward with 300 square feet plus 100 square foot per bedroom as the minimum size for units in Brattleboro.
In the missing middle housing overlay.
Housing overlay.
Okay.
I will renew my seconding.
Okay.
If there's no discussion, but interrupt me if there is. Dan.
Yeah, just a question for Brandy, perhaps, about one of the notes made in this section. The bathroom square footage requirement, is there a reason we might want to, let's just say, you know, put a minimum in, so for the size of a bathroom or for a kitchen or for any component, because we're already, you know, if we start to piece out the whole place, you know, if we're specifying the bedroom, then should we specify each piece?
Code specifies. International Residential Building Code specifies.
So what, okay, so what is it?
They don't specify the bathroom. This is the annoying part. They specify the bedroom, and they specify the living area, and they specify the size of the closet, but they don't specify the size of the bathroom. You know, you can certainly look at really compact bathroom floor plans and think, what can you do? And you can do one of those really weird toilets that has the built-in sink, I guess. But, you know, realistically, if you need to be able to open and close the door and get in there, you know, that's.
I want to say, I mean, we don't have building code here, so our level of review in the office, I don't want to get to like super fine detail of each room. We probably want to, I mean, the 300 and 100 is easiest because they'll say like, oh, it's a 1 bedroom. That's the kind of thing we get because of, water and sewer hookups. But I don't really want to get into regulating bathroom size or kitchen size.
Okay, in that case, may I ask about the bedroom size? So that's essentially, we're talking 10 by 10. I think if we were to call this a real minimum, I think we could go lower than that.
So
Or could we?
the
Or can
bedroom
we?
minimum, I believe, is 8 by 10.
Is it 8 by 10? So 80 square
Is 8
feet.
by 10, but it also has a closet component. And you have to think about you typically need some room to access the bedroom from, right?
The door swing, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So that's the adding of 100. I did take that from Massachusetts. That's the system that they've got set up with their. They have. I don't know how many of you have looked at the housing provisions at all in Massachusetts, but they have a much more robust set of state requirements that municipalities are expected to meet, and so some of their standards relate to specifying affordability and the components of those affordable units. And so they have a fairly robust set of minimum unit sizes that relate back to that part of their statute. And they were doing increments of 100 for bedrooms.
So the motion's been made, it's been seconded. We had some discussion. We could have more if someone wants to. Not hearing it.
See if anybody has any discussion.
Hmm?
I said we could call for a vote to see if there's any further discussion. Yeah.
Well, the motion and second does that.
Okay. Great.
So all those in favor? Unless you need a motion repeated. Yep, so it's all three on Zoom remotely and all three in person. Great. Moving.
Okay. So rooming and boarding houses. You were discussing how many guest rooms or rental rooms to allow, I guess rental rooms to allow in a rooming and boarding house. The definition currently sits at 6. The points I wanted to raise there, once again, it's a policy question at this point for you to think through. Some of the aspects to think about in terms of the likely number of occupants and the other related provisions that would need to be within the structure. So kitchen, bathroom, likely laundry and living space for residents. So, and then also remembering that you do have both the rooming and boarding house definition and the SRO definition. So those are somewhat distinct from one another and have different different requirements.
Yeah, one of my comments was the one proposing to increase from the hard maximum of 6 rooms in a rooming house to some unknown number more than that. Yeah, I lived in a house here. I rented for a few months here in Brattleboro in a house that was basically, I mean, it was 3 floors and all the doors were always open between the floors. And there was 13 bedrooms in there. I thought it was great. That's my in-depth position. It was not unlucky 13. We could choose a luckier number if we want. I think though the town required them to kind of put in some proper doors and make it a 3-unit house, a 3-unit building. But it easily could not have been a 3-unit building. It could have been a single building house that has 13 beds in it. Now, as far as if there's going to be 1 kitchen or 1 per floor, That's one issue, but if you guys have gone through, the staff's proposed changes, and watched the DRB meeting where, Holton Homes, the DRB approved Holton Home being converted to a 35-ish unit SRO with only one kitchen.
Ooh.
But here we're saying a 6-bedroom rooming house can only,
Just
a
to,
rooming house with one kitchen can only have a max of 6 bedrooms rented. Seems like a little disconnect there, either at the SRO end or at the rooming house end. So to me, and because I've been in what could be considered a rooming house with more than 6, and seems quite like a smooth operation in my mind.
So the rooming house definition requires, there's something special about it.
Oh, currently, right, it requires 4,
In-
one kitchen per every.
No, that's the SRO.
Oh, that's the SRO,
The
right,
rooming
right,
and
right.
boarding house actually is owner occupied.
Right,
It's the board, primarily in private homes. And commonly includes meals, housekeeping and laundry service.
yeah, but not necessarily.
It's being interpreted that way. Yeah.
So it's.
I don't think it has to be owner occupied, Sue. I think it needs to have a resident manager of some sort.
That's the SRO.
Doesn't really have,
That's the SRO. I mean,
that's SRO.
yeah,
It's really owner specific.
So-
no, it says, it's not, it doesn't say owner, it says the board,
Boarding house, would be owner occupied versus
sorry,
an
revision's
SRO.
going. The boarder's principal resident, primarily in private homes is what it says. It doesn't say owner occupied.
Right. 'cause
It says
boarding
private
houses
homes.
Have the owner living on the premises, just like a regular Airbnb, but.
Yeah.
An SRO, like I did, I had shared occupancy and I was in a private house. Sometimes the landlord stayed, it wasn't a boarding house, but it varies, it depends. That's another gray area too.
I have to say, I don't love our definitions. I think
Yeah,
they're a little
no, the
dated
language
and not
is-
really
Yeah. I don't like the
contemporary.
language.
So the standards for rooming and boarding house do require that a resident of the dwelling the operator be a resident of the dwelling. It doesn't have to be the owner, but they do have to be,
There
it has to be
Thanks
right,
for,
resident.
I was just looking at the definition.
Just to put out there, that specific
That's
piece, in both this and the single room occupancy, and also the bed and breakfast and inn standards,
Mhm.
has been seemingly a very effective way of preventing, short-term rental conversions of existing housing units, just anecdotally. So I don't know if that's taken positively or negatively, but that seems to be a way of preventing land use conflict with that type of thing and housing.
What is a way of preventing it? Having a limit on the number?
Having the live-in manager.
Oh, the live-in manager, right?
What is the question we're trying to address here?
The max number of rented bedrooms allowed in a rooming house.
And it's
Or a
currently set
boarding
to
house.
6, and you would
It's currently
recommend that
set
it
to
be
6.
higher. What,
Yeah.
what number would you like to see, Tom?
Oh, gosh, another arbitrary number,
Ah,
except for my one anecdotal experience in a 13-bedroom house.
ooh,
Which would have been a rooming house, but that allowance wasn't allowed, so they went with 3 units. They semi-converted it. 12. Thoughts?
13,
That's an unlucky number. I don't want to
14.
use psychological,
Is that a
black
motion?
magic.
All right, so we.
Do you wanna
can
make a
do
motion?
14.
Yeah, sure, I'll make that motion.
Well, what was the motion?
Just in the provision section of rooming houses where it spells out the standards, the maximum currently is 6 rented rooms. Right, for the building, and I would say increase it to 12.
I like 12. 12 is a good number.
By the dozen.
Can I interrupt it for a second? So I think Brandy brought up the question of number of residents per room. And I think we should talk about that a little bit. And then the number of bathrooms per room in a building, that kind of thing. Are we just I mean, can we make just that one distinction of number of rooms in a building without any other conditions? Or do
So
we need?
there is, Dan, in response to that, there is a provision right now in the standards for rooming or boarding house that limits it to 2 adults in a room. There is not a provision for a number of bathrooms or, the amount of kitchen facilities that are needed. When it was at 6 renters or 6 rental rooms, that's not perhaps as critical. If you really increase that number, then maybe like the SRO, which does have some level of specificity around that, whether that needs to be reviewed again or not. But whether you would want to consider that.
Brandy, do we know if code would kick in and require a certain number of things of that nature at the state level for these uses, or is that a gray area?
I don't know the answer to that question. My sense is no, because of work that I have done in a couple of resort communities where they've been converting things that are more like hostels over to worker housing. And I'm aware of at least one where I know they were going to convert it for 36 people, and it didn't have much in the way of facilities inside of it, let's say, other than just places where people who are supposed to be exhausted from skiing and beer were supposed to sleep.
Well, based off Dan's comment and others, it reminds me that when and if we eventually get to the staff recommendations for changes to the SROs, I wanted to add, I will plan to add the caveat or provision that there be at least 1 bathroom per floor. I think it's a little onerous to ask people to have to walk up and down the stairs. So I would say, where is our rooming house? If we are going to increase to 12, which is my motion for rooming houses, that we also add a provision which doesn't exist currently at all, but that there be at least 1 bathroom per floor. Because if it is a 3-story, and I think most likely, a big building is likely going to be built with more than 1 bedroom, but it could be good just to ensure that it is done so.
So I guess my burning question, the average SRO is what, 12? Do we set a number, or do we say?
We're talking about rooming houses.
Upper rooming houses, the average houses nowadays will accommodate 12, or they have to add extra?
Probably not, but there's probably some.
Yeah, I was
Larger
thinking, do we
rooms.
want 12, or is that a number we're just throwing out?
Well, there's plenty of big buildings,
Yeah.
big houses that exist that are, 3 stories in
That's
town,
true.
and
There are.
they could either be a 3-unit, building, or they could be a 1-unit with multiple bedrooms.
And I have to agree with you, like, we have seen houses that are spread out that other rooms can be accommodated, so. Yeah, but what? No, you can do 12.
So that's the modification to my motion
But the bathrooms too.
with it, yeah.
So
We don't have a s-
12 bedrooms and 1 bathroom per floor.
But not just per floor.
Minimum of about, at least a
I would
bathroom per
say,
floor.
like I said, if it was like a regular ranch style house or a big place where rooms could be made, I would say to accommodate 12 rather than just floors, if you know what I mean. I mean, you don't get a house that has like the floors if you have just 1 house, and so you didn't have rooms that are available to accommodate within that needs of 12. There should be enough bathrooms to accommodate 12. So I would say roughly 3 bathrooms in general, rather than floors. So we can put the language to that rather than in each floor, because a lot of houses on floors have floors out with just, ranch style with this, regular. So I would just say to accommodate in that 12, at least 3 bathrooms per whatever amount of people that are accommodating.
So 1 bathroom for every 4 bedrooms?
For every 4 residents, I would say.
Oh, boy.
The way it's written now, you could have 2 adults per room.
So,
I think Dan had something you wanted to
Yeah.
say about
I
that.
would say, yeah,
That
per
could
bedroom,
come
at least
in
3.
and out of compliance very easily
Right.
if it was based on
Yeah.
a number of residents, and
Yeah.
I don't think we'd have any
Yeah.
way of really nailing that
Yeah.
down.
All right, bathroom for every 4 bedrooms.
Well, can I interrupt for a second? I think I would keep it at 6 myself, because if it's already in place, I think we'd want to allow some basically grandfathering in what already exists,
Right.
just as because you'd then lose one unit if you had to add a bathroom. That's my thinking on that.
And you'd recommend one bathroom for every 6 bedrooms?
Well, if that is the standard now, assuming the worst, let's say that that is the case, then I think you could just keep, because if, let's say you have a building with 6 right now,
Yep.
I mean, I don't know, you could call it 1.5 bath, I guess, but if it's per 4, you'd have to at least add a half bath, maybe. I suppose call it a whole bath, but that would take, regardless of what it is, it would take out a room.
Mhm. Good point.
If it's already existing. And I'm guessing that this is really for the sake of converting the typical old house and so forth. But I think, and by the way, I think I've already decided I'm gonna abstain from this one, just for the sake of, and so if you have questions as to why I would do that, I just happen to know a little bit too much maybe about SROs. The living conditions, the question of number of people per unit. It's definitely a tricky thing to change right now. That's what I would say.
Thank you for that transparency.
I'll accept the comments and modify the motion to be at least one bathroom for every 6 bedrooms, rented bedrooms, no bedrooms, bedrooms, and at least one bathroom per every floor that has a bedroom on it.
I just would have reservation health wise, but I mean, 6 people, when you have a residence and you're having the health department coming in, you got 6 people using one bathroom. That just poses a bit of a,
It can work, Gary. It can work. I mean, I hear you, but it could be 12 people.
I mean, you have a family that lives in that one particular room too. You have a lot of.
Yeah. No, honestly, I'll just put this out to you. The complication arises if and when children come into the picture, and that, and then there are other questions that would add to the complexity, like laundry. I mean, laundry and living and common living spaces, which Brandy mentions. It's just another thing to be thinking about. At what point do you require laundry on site, or if at all? And there are minimum sizes for hallways and so forth, but do you require that there is some form of common space? Let's say if there's a kitchen, right? Does there have to be like an eat-in kitchen, or is it just a countertop with a sink and a little fridge? There's all kinds of little detail questions. But again, we're only talking about the number of rooms allowed, right?
Right. I was looking into.
Well, then we stretched it into the bathrooms, yeah.
But we should remember that this is in private homes where the owner, has a presence there, and
Well, not necessarily the owner.
Right.
Yeah.
There has to be a resident operator. It doesn't have to be the owner.
Right.
Is that, Brandy, is that actually true for SROs as well?
It typically is. Usually the way they're set up is that it's some sort of
One of the residents has to be assigned to be that. Okay.
That's typically how I've seen it done. I'm familiar with a facility like that that's run in Rutland, and I know that's how they run theirs. And my sense is that that's pretty much the common approach.
Mm-hmm.
As far as
people get locked out, somebody needs to have the keys, that kind of thing.
Oh, right, a house right.
I think our
yeah.
standard stands say that you do have to have a resident, not owner, but a resident who runs it, I believe, unless it's under 10.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think there has to be some I've never heard of that in SROs myself,
And I was also thinking about.
but they're smaller ones, usually.
Or I was thinking about ADA compliancy too with those one bathrooms. So now you're getting into that, but that's another issue too, when you have 6 people in there, like they said, as well too, so.
Well, I mean, once again, we're just talking about, for rooming houses, we're talking about private homes, which don't have to comply with ADA.
Right, if they're grandfathered in or whatever.
They do once they're going to rent rooms out to the general public.
Yeah.
Yeah, rental housing law would apply for sure.
Like an elevator, if it's 3 stories.
So I think it would,
Oh,
No,
Have a walk up with 3
A
steps.
walk-up ramp or.
it would cease to be a single family house though, as far as zoning.
Oh, because it'd be a rooming house, sorry. Right.
So this is a very deep.
I mean, the other thing is we can not touch these areas and bring it back later.
Yeah,
But-
we could. I have a.
I would highly suggest that myself. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit touchy right now because you're going to run into a situation where actually it could be counteractive to what you're trying to do.
All right. I'll retract my motion. I guess, unless there's nothing else with the rooming and boarding houses, let's move on. In the limited time we have left. I mean, even getting through Brandy's stuff here is going to be tough.
well,
So
we've covered everything, Tom, on the list from the March 3 memo that I needed an answer to so that I can go in and make final adjustments. Some of those other things were kind of background information for you folks who ask questions, but they don't necessarily require a decision from you guys. So the decision ones we just covered.
What about height, Brandy?
Yeah, what about building?
Well, now we're moving on to today's memo.
Got
So there are 2 items in there. The one relates to building height. We had ended up, because of how we had discussed the missing middle housing and how we wanted to formulate that in relation in height, and we dropped that in. We ended up with these 2 not entirely in sync definitions of height, and I knew before I left that it was a bad fit, but I figured I would deal with it when I got back, and so now we're back, and it's still a bad fit, and there's not really an easy way to fix it and keep the story definitions going, because there's kind of a rationale why they're different, as weird as that is. So my recommendation is to think about changing the base zoning district measurements from stories to height to actual feet, and get rid of the story measurement there, and then leave the story measurement as we drafted it for the missing middle pieces, because what we're really trying to do there is kind of define the form of the building and be like, if you fit inside this box we've just drawn for you, then you have like a really easy path to getting a permit. So we actually want to keep that dimensionally defined. I think the way we have it, that works better. But I think if we switch over to doing feet measurements for the base zoning districts, that will address the incompatibility. It will simplify some other aspects of the regs too. I know that we went with stories back in 10 years ago when we worked on this, sort of in the notion of, I think, building from the idea of requiring at least 2 stories in some of those districts. But we can still have a functional 2-story criteria where you want it, and still express the maximum building height in feet. So I think this could be the simpler solution. So for the most part, in the districts where there is mixed uses, basically I took the story measurement and multiplied by 12 to get the height. I turned that as if it was a 12-foot story, sort of averaging that out. In the village center, I did come down to a 20-foot minimum from a 24. because the village center mixed use is possibly more likely to be residential buildings and not more commercial or mixed use buildings, and they're probably not going to have those types of high ceilings that a commercial building would have. So I think that's probably more compatible there. And then the rural districts you already were doing in feet anyway, and the residential you were already doing that in feet, not stories.
Randy, for the VCMU line, that's the entire structure, right? Because we're not considering stories. It's inclusive of the gable roof.
So my recommendation is to measure height from the average finished grade to the eave line if you've got a pitched roof, or to the roof deck if you've got a flat roof.
The eave line.
Yep. So you're not going to count the space in the gable towards the height.
A lot of, at least in my neighborhood, and I realize they're historic, but people could still build this way. The second story is almost entirely
is in the gable. Yep. So it's not counting that space against someone. So you know how we talked about some of these other measurements. It's actually
no, but you're saying you have 20 feet underneath that eave.
Yep.
So there would be 20 feet and then a story above it, and that's the minimum.
Well, that's the minimum. Yeah.
So all the 2-story houses wouldn't be allowed anymore.
No, I think that
story and then the next one above it is all in the roof almost.
Well, you are requiring a 2-story building there now, so you wouldn't be able to build a 1.5. We do have, that's how these definitions ended up different, is because they ended up defining the space under the roof differently. So you do have a standard in there now that separates out the difference between attic space and a story now.
Well, Sue said she's confused. So my house, for example, the eave is only 10 feet off the ground.
Right.
But it's a 2-story building.
Right.
It probably does not meet the current definition of a 2-story building in the regulations. You may have second level living space, but it probably doesn't meet the definition of a full story. Yeah, this whole question of how high buildings are is actually really challenging.
Because I was thinking it was a good thing that it was just measuring to the eave, because that gives you,
allows
it does give you the space,
allowing the pitched roof and whatever's going on in there. But in your case, you're in a mixed use zoning district, so requiring 2 functional floors under that, I see the issue there.
Yeah, I mean that's how you've had that set up for new construction. It would restrict putting in some residential types, right, that are not going to be a full 2-story.
Is there a statutorily valid way to separate mixed use and commercial buildings by that height definition, and perhaps not having a minimum for residential uses?
I typically discourage, you can do it legally under statute, but I typically discourage setting different dimensional standards based on the use of the structure, because the use of the structure can change over time. So, you build something following the requirements for a residential property or a residential building. It doesn't mean that, 6 years down the road, somebody doesn't want it to become something else. We could lower the, I lowered it to 20. We could lower it a bit more. And if you also think that we're measuring from average finished grade, for a lot of buildings, remember, there will be some height at the bottom, right? That will come into play there, a couple of feet at least.
Thickness of the floor system separating the 2 stories, and then the thickness of the ceiling system above that. So we do have, even have an 8-foot ceiling space on 2 levels. We're getting pretty close to 20 feet for the wall height, if we're not counting anything that's in the gable. I'm curious in terms of our measurement, is that measuring to the bottom of the eaves to the lowest point of the eaves or the point where the eave meets the wall?
I would do it where the eave meets the wall.
I think we should clarify that.
Yeah.
But I think
That's
that,
typically when I draw the picture, that's typically the
that makes the most sense. And I think that the picture will help to clarify that, but perhaps our words could too.
Yep.
Dan got his hand.
Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on the rural residential 35-foot number and why it wouldn't be okay to have it be, let's say, 48.
Thoughts, Brandy?
I am sorry, I missed the beginning of that, actually almost all of it, because my little earbuds died and I had to switch over. So I'm sorry.
No worries.
I can see your lips, but I can't lip read.
No worries. No, the rural residential 35-foot limit.
Mhm.
What would be your thoughts on raising it to 48?
You know, I could tell you that it's historically set at 35 because basically everywhere in Vermont set everything at 35 because, you know, that was the size of the ladder on the fire truck. No, I'm
Yeah.
serious. That was
No,
the
no,
size.
I heard something to that effect. I'm glad to hear it
Yeah,
from you. 'Cause
it's
I didn't know
literally
if that was
true.
true or not. Yeah.
That is absolutely where the number came from.
Okay.
You know, so that has been a long-standing traditional number. You could adjust it up or down if you wanted to. You know, it for the most part, it does keep to buildings to 2 full stories and some space under the gable, depending on the, you know, pitch of the roof and the nature of the site.
Yeah, so that's 35 without the gable, but I must say, you know, a lot of when people look at a building, they don't conceptualize the feet and they might think 35 should look smaller, even though it's pretty big, you know.
A 35-foot, fully
it's-
built, a 35-foot building can look fairly big in a neighborhood.
Yep, absolutely. Especially if it's from the average grade, you know, height and so forth. So, you know, slopes can be deceiving. But I guess that's why I'm wondering though, you know, because of the perception issue, when you see that 35 feet in whatever, from whatever perspective, I think it would be making a good statement myself, even if we increased it a little bit. But I guess I was putting the 48 because of the other zones. But you know, even if we went to, you know, 40 or something as a sort of a token idea that you know, you could encourage another floor essentially when people don't think that it's really anywhere near 35 feet. It already is, you know.
You know, I don't think you would have an issue from your fire department on that. They did specify 60 feet, and I think that stands as their point at which they want to, and that'll be from the lowest point up. So if you are building into a slope, they're going to measure from the lowest grade up, not from the average. And given the slopes in Brattleboro, these numbers actually, that actually starts to matter, where you're going to measure from. So, you know, if you were to increase that 35 feet, would you, you know, create opportunity for people to build up a bit more in the residential neighborhoods? Maybe another floor. The other thing to perhaps keep in mind is that there is language right now in front of the legislature that's going to automatically create another floor as a potential bonus in water and sewer served areas, if that passes the way it's written right now. So you might want to think, we might want to keep that in mind too, as we look forward to where these height limits end up, because you may be in a position where you're going to have to story to whatever you set it at in those areas. I don't know if you had seen that in the omnibus bill, the ominous
Was it in there?
omnibus bill.
Still in there, yeah.
Yeah.
I think according to our bylaws, we're supposed to vote if we're going to go past 8 p.m. And we have. So I'll pretend we already voted. No, just kidding. I think we're supposed to pick a specific time, but we could, does someone want to make a motion to continue until a certain time? I'd like to just, I mean, this was maybe, the plan was that it could be Brandy's last meeting with us. So I think it's pretty important that we try to get through stuff with her. If we get 4 votes, then we can continue the meeting. But someone has.
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion for 8:45.
Great, and maybe we'll finish sooner.
I'm not gonna be able to stay that. So I'll work out when I have to.
Okay, is there a second? I will second it. Great. All those in favor of continuing the meeting? Raise your hand. That's Lina, that's myself,
Okay.
that's Dan, that's Prudence. And the noes, the nays, the negatives, Sarah and Gary, okay? And of course, people are free to leave. The 2 dissenters, that won't bring us below a quorum, but we hope that you stay. Okay, let's continue.
So in the thinking about your time constraints, if you guys want to spend a little time talking about this, further thinking it through, I know it just sort of landed in front of you today. I haven't had a chance to sort of check in with Sue and Stephen to sort of hash through this, but if generally you think that going in the direction of doing it in feet for the base districts and then leaving the missing middle stuff as we drafted it seems like the right approach, we can spend a little bit more time in the background after this meeting refining this concept. But if you understand the basic approach and it sounds good, then we can proceed forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know, I think staff in general is okay with the foot, or measuring it in feet. We had a little conversation about what about raising it, kind of like Dan was suggesting, just nudging it up a bit to start seeing, for the possibility of incremental change. So I wanted to talk to the fire department about that, but, I think in general, we were okay with the measurement in feet.
I think if we're gonna do a proposal related to this, I, for the most part, feel comfortable with the building heights as listed. But the 2 I would nudge on would be to change VCMU to an 18-foot minimum and to change RN, RR, RL to a 48-foot maximum, as Dan suggested.
I'd also just like to put in the thought that RN is pretty different than RR and RL, at least in my mind. Right, those are rural, very spread out districts, but the RN, we're making moves. It's a developed district. We're making moves to densify it. So there should be a distinction there. But I don't have, as I think as Brandy already positioned us here or proposed, I don't think we should. We're just seeing it now. We're at 5 p.m. If you got on your computers then, which is fine. But we can, staff can draft it, and we can actually see maybe what it looks like. And with our comments, it can be refined a little bit. So then we'll see it next month. But any other thoughts on the height? Hate to have the last word, but it's one of the benefits of doing.
Just a quick question again for Brandy. If it does require fire department approval, how does that get handled? Generally speaking, is it just a permit, or is it a okay?
This might be a question
They've seen it.
better aimed at Sue once she's swallowed her water, but
Sorry about that. Yeah.
my sense is that you have a technical review process built in the regs, and you would use that to pass the application through the fire department to get their input.
That's exactly how it works. Yeah. When I said passing by the fire department, I just, even as we're writing these regulations and coming to agreement on it, I just want to make sure that they're not going to be in opposition because they're,
Sure.
can't get the bigger truck out there or whatever. So.
No planning commission wants to be at a public hearing and hear the fire department doesn't agree with them. That's a bad place to be. So the last item here, and once again, this is one that probably maybe we have a time for a little bit of discussion of what it is you want to achieve. I can lay out the problem for you or the where we are with this issue, and maybe we can have a little bit of discussion. But it's going to take some more work to resolve. So this one relates to section 530 or section 353 of your regulations, which is one of the PUD types, and it's a traditional neighborhood development PUD. And so back when I started this and did the review and looked at things, I noted that given the changes that you'd already made, it really undermined the bonus provisions that were built into this PUD, which really raised the question of, is this PUD still relevant? Do you need it? We've made even more changes as we've gone along, and that's actually made that question even bigger. So right now, so there's no bonus to offer applicants. There's, given we've reduced down the lot sizes and the setbacks and such, there's probably little benefit that an applicant would see from the flexibility that you get through a PUD to reduce lot sizes and setbacks, because we kind of have done that just like we said with the waiver, right? You don't need special permission if you just changed the base. And we've also made allowance so that you could have multiple principal buildings and multiple uses on a lot. So you also don't need to do a PUD to get that. So the only thing left that you need to have this PUD to do, that you can't do under the conventional zoning, is to put 3 or more single unit homes on a single lot. So that's the only function, I guess we could say, that this PUD has left, would be to provide an approval process for someone that had a big piece of land that they wanted to put multiple single unit homes on and didn't want to divide up those homes so that each home was sitting on a lot. So it would be a fairly atypical single unit residential development, but still something that, you know, you may want to allow for. So really, we kind of got to figure out whether we need this provision, whether we need to change this provision, get rid of it the way it is now, or just sort of leave it here so that there still is this doorway that someone could walk through if they needed to, even though we don't anticipate that many people would necessarily want it. We've been looking, Sue, and I, as we've talked about this, have been looking at what Winston Prouty wants to do. You know, theoretically, they might want to do something that would have fallen into this before, but they have some issues with it on their site with meeting some of the grid networked street standards that go along with this type of PUD. So it isn't a really good fit for them either. So I guess the question is, to what extent, to what you want to see accomplished, you know, and have we accomplished it in other means, sort of then becomes the question. And is there anything left that we need to do here, that we need to get this section to work for? And, you know, this is where we are sitting with this question.
Brittany, I mean, at first blush, I was like, okay, well, it's just single family homes. We don't really need it. But then when I think about one of the Brattleboro's most successful subdivisions in the last 10, 20, 30 years, it's actually a PUD, and it's Buttonwoods Estates, which is up off of Black Mountain Road. And, you know, that wouldn't fit under the cottage cluster development, because I think the structures might be larger than what we have, and they're not kind of clustered in little pods either. So on one hand, I feel like, yeah, the TND as written is not necessarily going to get us anything, because we've, you know, in the traditional neighborhoods, we've kind of gone a different route. But we don't have that kind of broader PUD that can envision single family homes. And that might still be attractive to developers.
Yeah, I don't know how they structured the ownership. They are ownership units, aren't they? In that
They're rentals.
they are rentals.
But they're single family homes, but they're all, because they built it around the time of the crash and no way.
Okay.
Supposed to be home ownership, but
they didn't sell. Yeah. Okay.
the financing didn't work out, so they went with a lease model.
Yeah. So that's the one thing that's not covered. And if that's the only thing we need to cover, then we might need to come up with a different tool to do it with. It seems like this is really vestigial in a way at this point, because we've taken so many pieces out from underneath it. And so if you think that allowance to do some sort of a PUD that would allow for a single family, single unit development to go forward, I think maybe the thing to do is to rewrite this, facilitate that, and eliminate the street, components and things that are in here now, and just, make it a mechanism to approve that layout. And the layout, would basically follow the residential neighborhood standards we've just laid out, which are, a compact, walkable neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything we could do with the driveway and street standards to get at, I guess, the length of blocks and the angle of intersections? I know we have language that does touch that a bit, but if one of the other things that maybe this is doing, if it were to be used, is securing that neighborhood scale in a more urban gridded or generally gridded pattern that wouldn't necessarily be required of new development as otherwise subdivided, there might be a way that we could get at that in our design standards, but have some flexibility for edge cases like Winston Prouty, where being up on a steep grade would make that kind of a.
Yeah, I think your baseline street standards are gonna cut it. You don't have a block standard, but the block standard would be problematic for Winston Prouty. So you've got the sidewalk components, you've got, I think is there a limit on cul-de-sac length? I think there might be.
I think so.
I think I remember that there is. So you have controls in there. There's definitely, all the sidewalk components that you need. So, there perhaps isn't a green space component as you might get in a traditional neighborhood PUD setting. I'd have to go back to the baseline subdivision standards and see where that fits. It's been a while since I've gone through those with a fine-tooth comb, but I guess maybe from the point of view of the Planning Commission, we can continue to have a planner conversation about this later, perhaps. But just in terms of, getting a better sense of maybe what people want to see as a development outcome, if you were to think about either the Winston Prouty site or some, there are a couple of other larger properties within the water sewer service territory that we've looked at, not as large as Winston Prouty, but enough that you could be talking about, more than 3 homes, right? A new little neighborhood of some sort. So I guess if you think about it from the point of view of what do you want for that neighborhood. And then we can see whether that can, if that's outcome is going to come out of the conventional regs, or do we need to add something?
My only comment as far as feedback on your what you're presenting about traditional neighborhood PUDs as a commissioner, not as the chair, is that I see that you've definitely highlighted the issue here and the almost it being vestigial, and I do see that it needs to be addressed. but my thoughts aren't clear enough to offer any guidance at this point.
Yeah.
True that this has never been used?
It is true.
Huh.
It's existed since 2015.
Oh, okay, so it's still relatively new.
The cottage cluster also has never been used.
The cottage cluster has also, never been used. So, I mean, part of me thinks if we're going to tweak this, then maybe we just do something that handles both, because I think the cottage cluster might, fall under the missing middle housing overlay better.
And the fact that neither of these types of PUDs has been used is actually not atypical or unusual.
No.
I do personally like that there is that option. I forget the wording that you, Brandy, used or staff used, that there is an outlet for unusual situations or possibilities or creativity, with review, or as long as it's kind of fits into some other standards. So I do like that. I do like that our regs don't just say like, hey, this just isn't allowed anywhere in town. I mean, I know there are certain things that aren't allowed, like certain uses, but yeah, something general like 3 single-family houses per lot, like sure, that could work out. I don't see the reason to just ban that outright. So,
well, I mean, the reason that there's some fairly solid reasons for not just letting it happen, but for requiring a review process for it to make sure that it's well set up internally, which is sort of where this is falling into this gap, where just the single units are the thing that you can't do a bunch of, because you can't deal with them through the site plan review the same way and things like that. So it's a bit of a land use law problem, and sort of what applies, which parts of the regulations apply to what. That probably means we need something for language, but it, like Sue's saying, perhaps it doesn't need to be 2 separate things, one for cottages and one for other single family homes, that we could consolidate and maybe simplify a little bit.
Does the fact that we do allow for 3+ duplexes on a lot, does that trigger the same sort of problem with land use law in Vermont because of the site plan?
Technically, it kind of does, because they also are independent of site plan review. But you've probably had, there's a much less likelihood of that happening than there is of some of the three singles, to be honest.
Do you want to, I mean, I think that staff probably has more experience with planned unit developments and thinking about what should be in it. Do you want to have us work that out with Brandy and bring you language in April?
Sure.
Yes.
I see nodding heads. My head's nodding too. I think so. Yep.
I did want to explain the nature of the problem to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
We eliminated a lot of regulations that would prevent people from doing new innovative housing. That's a good thing. Something that we can have you all put together that's going to enable us to create more of the type of housing we'd like to see on a larger scale. That's a good thing too.
Okay.
And I just want to quickly ask the Winston Prouty memo and our consideration of the rezoning. Does that need to, Brandy, do you want that to happen at all in real time with you or at a meeting? Or that's something that we can.
You guys can deal with that, yeah.
To the map, or they'll.
Yeah.
Okay, to change them. Great.
Yeah, I only put it under bylaw modernization because it's part of the work we're looking at, but yeah, it doesn't direct.
And I saw Dan's hand up. I just wanted to get that in before. I mean, I'm the chair, so I can control the meeting, but I didn't want Brandy to like sign off or anything before I asked that question, but Dan has his hand up.
Sure. Yeah, Brandy, in the memo, were there supposed to have been two maps or only the one? Because it seems like there's a reference to a plan in Montpelier.
Yeah, so that is actually, I gave you the image of the Montpelier plan. I don't know, Sue, what the status of the various Winston Prouty plans are and whether the Planning Commission has seen any of that or whether they're kind of going out or not.
It was public.
Select
It was
board
in the
meeting.
file. So some of them may have looked at it.
Yeah.
But that was kind of their early visions. They have been working on a master plan and I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
If it's changed.
I thought that the example that I did have of this project in Montpelier was a good parallel actually for their site because it topographically, it's got some similarities to their property and sort of size-wise of the portion they might want to develop. And it kind of does the thing that the traditional neighborhood regs were getting at, which was to build a variety of different housing types in a neighborhood setting. This they did manage to get something of a little street grid going, that kind of of thing. But it's hard if you zoom into the image a little bit. You can get maybe a better sense of what's being proposed there on the ground. It's actually a very interesting project because Habitat for Humanity is going to build the single and duplex units, and then they're going to seek partners to build the other housing on that property, sort of a partnership deal.
Okay, this may be the last time we see Brandy at a planning commission meeting for this project.
For a while, right? It's going to help us with the adoption
Yeah.
or public hearings.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, you'll be here at the public hearing.
Yeah, you can't get rid of me that easily, Tom.
Well, no, I knew that there would be a future project where there's a high chance. No, I don't think.
Okay.
Being a rural state that we are, we'll likely, who knows? We have a project every year, so if there's a high percentage, we'll see you again in coming years. Is what I meant. Yeah, Dan's hands up.
Well, and before we go, am I correct that we decided not to vote on the building height question?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
Pushing it.
I guess you can make a motion if you wanted to, but it seems like we were, just seeing it kind of for the first time, and staff's kind of, think about it and get something a little more tailored to our comments back to us.
Yeah, you'll see it again in April.
That's fine. Okay, that's great.
during the company picnic.
But we have to do our public comment period.
That's the big one.
So,
And Mark Madden.
and the only member of the public is the BCTV guy doing overtime.
We should let Brandy go. Thank
Yeah,
you,
no.
Brandy.
Yeah, thank you,
All
Brandy.
right, Brandy, yeah.
Looks like she already turned her back on
And
us.
public participation, I don't know if we had anybody in the public.
I know, no.
Spread the word.
Yeah, there you go.
I
That's
didn't
pretty
even
one.
know that we adjourned this meeting.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
And Dan as well.
Thank
There
you,
you go.
everybody.